Hello, good morning.
Good day or good evening, wherever you are logged in the world or world system, and welcome to another installment of the SALISES Forum. Special welcome to our panelists. This forum looks at another important event, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean diaspora, and that is Carnival, another event that has been badly affected, disrupted, terminated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And this morning, we want to have a discussion concerning the challenges that Carnival has faced over the last 2 years in the context of this pandemic, and possibly the lessons learned as all stakeholders in this sector try to recover so that they could be well positioned to restart the carnival as we know it post COVID-19. I am Roy McCree. I am your chair for the forum today, and I look forward to the exchanges between or among the panelists and those who are listening, watching near and far. So without much further ado, I would want to invite the acting director of SALISES to give his own welcome and introduction for this forum. Dr. Sinbernard.
Thank you, Dr. McCree, and all protocols observed. I would like to bring hearty greetings and a hearty welcome to our panelists, our staff, and all of our participants in the virtual audience. I'm sure you all will agree that this is a very special engagement that we are about to witness today. And I take great pleasure as the acting director of SALISES to bring this to everyone. And I say this because oftentimes the university has been accused of not engaging sufficiently into matters that really apply to us as a people, as a region, and particularly in the context of development, a cause that SALISES actually prides itself as being engaged in. So it is no accident that SALISES is continuing to host this series of virtual forums, and this one that we are about to witness today is the 5th in such series. Obviously, Trinidad Carnival brand means a lot to all of us here in TNT. And I would say in our country, hundreds of thousands of citizens who live here, and also several hundreds of thousands of our citizens who live overseas, and by extension, all of the other peoples who enjoy the Trinidad Carnival brand know and can identify with what I am speaking about. I mean, when I hear about Carnival, I think a bit about the sacred, I think a bit about the profane, but it is a gem of a festivity, and we all want to see it thrive. In the first 2 decades of the 20th century, at least as the world had approached the 1920s, the Spanish flu erupted. And I am sure, given the history of Carnival, that there were Carnival celebrations back then. And all of us have lived to see the Trinidad Carnival brand evolve into what it is today, and it will continue evolving. But certainly, I don't think, when I reflect upon that period and what I understand about that period, that the level of organization and sophistication that goes into organizing a carnival, I do not think it was there. And certainly, I do not think the scholarly enterprise was there, capturing the data and actually doing the kinds of analyses that would reflect, what impact that event would have had on the carnivals of the early 20th century. But nonetheless, it has evolved. The musics, the carnival musics, the carnival rhythms, the masquerade, the oral traditions have all the levels of participation, the engagement involving the state and civil society organs have all continued to thrive and evolve. And certainly Trinidad Carnival brand has become an international event in many parts of North America, Europe, other Caribbean islands, and going other places as well. So we are indeed proud of our tradition, our national tradition, and we want to see it thrive. Trinidad Carnival means a lot to many. Our heart and soul, right, revolves around the carnival spirit. And many households earn their annual income wholly or in part or in large part due to carnival. It has to thrive. So it is with this kind of spirit and really trying to understand, now that we have experienced the onset of COVID-19, what does all of this mean for Trinidad and Tobago? And in particular, Trinidad Carnival and Trinidad Carnival brand as an international phenomenon. I can remember 2 Saturdays ago meeting with my schoolmate, Dr. Kim Johnson, and we had a chat, and he was actually telling me, for anyone to really participate in Trinidad Carnival, they have to receive validation in the Mecca. Unless you are validated in the Mecca, perhaps you are not a true exponent of, what the carnival product is all about on that international scene. And really and truly, with what has been happening, we tend to wonder, whither goes Trinidad Carnival, what is likely to become of it, how do we resuscitate it, and so on. So having said all of that, I think, it is only wise that SALISES does what it does best and engage in bringing together the scholars and the thinkers and the practitioners who can best articulate some of these positions and create the kind of insights that would encourage, our virtual audience to discuss the issue frontally. And with us today, we have 3 of my UE colleagues. UE, I say UE, one is a former UE colleague, Dr. Joanne Tull, Dr. Keith Nurse, Dr. Kieran Niles. Those are my UWI colleagues that I identify along the mix in the panel, and they have graciously agreed to participate and contribute to today's events. I also have participating in today's events my college mate and my community mate, Mr. Derrick Lewis, who has been a champion in the promotion of events locally and internationally. And we do also have 2 friends of SALISES, Dr. Keller Francis and Dr. Franca Devines, friends of SALISES, who have graciously agreed and accepted our invitation to participate in the event today. These are noteworthy and respectable scholars, thinkers, practitioners who can give you that hands-on position and a set of insights that would tickle your imagination and stimulate the kind of discourse that obviously is coming from sober minds and therefore likely to contribute in no uncertain way to the rigor that is associated with what is about to transpire here today. So it is my distinct pleasure on behalf of SALISES, and when I say SALISES, not only SALISES St. Augustine, but SALISES on the Keyville campus and on the Mona campus as well, and by extension, the UWI, to invite all of you and wish that, you know, the proceedings of today's forum really capture your fancy and help us to advance the discourse in a positive way that would only augur well for Trinidad and Tobago and all those who aspire to see Carnival, the Trinidad Carnival brand, thrive and grow, and of course, evolve positively and progressively with the passage of time. So with this, I thank everyone, and I turn over to the chairperson to begin the proceedings.
Thank you, Dr. St. Bernard, and welcome again to the panelists. As you have been told previously, you would have 10 minutes to make your presentation, and I would be giving you a 2-minute warning, to wrap up your presentation. So I want to start right away with the first presenter, Dr. Joanne Tull, who is an academic, a researcher, and consultant in the Caribbean creative economy development with particular interest in festival statistics, cultural heritage and development, cultural industries, impacts, and creative entrepreneurship and strategy. She's currently completing work with the UE Press on the Caribbean creative and cultural economy. Dr. Tull is currently the academic coordinator of the undergraduate Carnival Studies program, as well as the postgraduate diploma in arts, cultural and enterprise management at the Department of Creative and Festival Arts at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. At the undergraduate level, she teaches the economics of culture, enterprise in internships for the arts, festival management, festival project and cultural research methods. At the postgraduate level, she also teaches arts, culture and society and project planning and development. I now invite Dr. Joanne Tull to make a 10-minute presentation. Dr. Tull.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning to the Director of SALISES. Thank you very much, Dr. St. Bernard, for that welcome and greeting. Good morning to my co-panelists, and most importantly, to our audience here in the webinar. I do give a special shout out to my childhood best friend, Professor Michelle Bess, who's here with us. And quite interestingly, we all ended up in the same field in some regard. She's a professor in heritage and tourism. And so I do hope that we are able to engage with the audience as well and get that rich discussion that we hope to. So in that regard, Dr. McCree, I assure you, I will stick with the 10 minutes. So I want to locate my discussion this morning around two considerations, given the topic that I have been given: economics, the COVID pandemic, economics, and participation in the TNT Carnival Experience. And I've been toying with these for some time now, really on account of the fact that we've had a pandemic that has affected us, and that we're at a place where we still are not clear that there is something that we can call carnival economics, or the economics of carnival, or festival economics, as I would more broadly say. And more importantly, that we are at a place where we need to contemplate carnival futures. And the first is this: the term Carnival Experience, when used, predominantly makes reference to a happening of some kind, and the occasion of carnival as an aesthetic, whether it's traditional, whether it's contemporary, as entertainment, and by extension, what we know of the contemporary landscape, in particular, notions of escapism and pleasure. And this is not surprising, because if you look at the literature on the broader construct of festival, it makes similar connotations. Getz, one of our leading theorists with regard to festival and events management and festival tourism, He speaks of festivals as special, and Alan concurs with that, again, noting something momentous. And our very own Professor Errol Hill gives direct reference to the carnival as street theater, again, capturing a direct reference to an occasion. Now, these assertions are not incorrect. But given what we are seeking to discuss today, in terms of understanding, planning, assessing, developing the future of Carnival, I want to suggest that when we consider the idea of Carnival experience in the ways that we usually do, it really is one-dimensioned. And in fact, it tends to focus on the consumptive or the demand side of the Carnival, which tends to place significant emphasis on the offerings of one kind or another. And we know them: Fete, Mass, Pan, for those who like the panorama, our very own the Old Yard at DCFA, Juve, and so on. And we could even go down that line and make distinctions in terms of that demand that is wanted, that is craved, because there's the costume, which is experience in of itself, and then on the road. And of course, we know there's a band that has certainly popularized the notion of the Carnival experience in that regard. They say they're not selling a costume, it's an experience that they are selling you. But for us as planners and academics and theorists and researchers, I want to encourage us to think beyond that scope. And it's very easy to fall into that, because when you look at the way in which we do plan from a state perspective, it takes that demand consumptive dimension at the forefront of our understandings. And we see it in the research. I mean, when Dr. Nurse and I started doing this work, when we asked the question, you know, how did you experience the Carnival? I believe we do use the word experience. Keith will tell me when he speaks. I believe we do. And you would see them ticking, you know, all of what I would have identified before. And so in a sense, if I may say, we perhaps lie at fault as well, because we include that in our data in terms of the strategies that we are making. I am not saying that Carnival experience is not important. What I am saying is that we have to look beyond that and understand that the idea of the Carnival experience is ensconced in something broader and more important, and that is a Carnival ecosystem. And if we appreciate that there is a Carnival ecosystem, we will recognize that demand side can't only be it. And most certainly that the supplier or the realm of supply that we think about cannot only be limited to satisfying those particular demands that I would have just mentioned there. And so if we think of a Carnival ecosystem in that regard, we can appreciate what Throsby said in his seminal work in 2001, Economics and Culture, when he said that, you know, if you look at culture, and in this regard, now I'm replacing culture with Carnival, the ecosystem, that is where you have a range of interactions occurring that can be modeled as transactions or exchanges within an economizing framework. And I've deliberately quoted Throsby because he's an economist, and I'll come to that shortly. And so it is important that we would appreciate that if it is that we are to really give proper understanding and to seriously plan the future for Carnival towards sustainability and towards development, we have to start thinking about that ecosystem. The idea of ecosystem is not new. Our colleagues in agriculture, Williams, Garcia, and Procopi, actually advanced their notion of a Carnival Ecology model, which I consider remaining one of the more outstanding pieces that have come out of what I like to call indigenous methodologies. In other words, coming out of us in the Caribbean and speaking to us and responding to the needs and the gaps that we have as we seek to propel our own development. And if you have a chance to look at that model, you would see that if you are familiar with biology, you know how ecology works. You know, there's something at the center and it all spirals out. And so ecology and ecosystem, what it suggests is that the experience is just a part of that. And the experience sometimes triggers or sometimes is driven by other factors operating in that ecosystem. For example, the way in which the broader festival landscape is managed, that taps into what is very important for a lot of governments in the region. I'm not sure if it's important in Trinidad and Tobago. They've never said that, which is festival tourism. And I suppose that may be part of the challenge as well.
Excuse me, 2 more minutes.
Yeah. Sure, thank you. Yes, and so basically, this brings me then to my second consideration, that if it is that we appreciate the idea of an ecosystem, it means, therefore, that we have to see participation as not just being the person that comes to consume, that being the festival tourist or the returnee, but rather that the participant is someone that is engaged in the festival, whether it's a community leader, whether it's a group, whether it's the creative entrepreneur, the carnival heritage entrepreneur, and by extension, that therefore valuing of that ecosystem that has to take all of these ranges of participants into consideration. In other words, we need to move past just measuring experience and begin to really measure that entire ecosystem so that we can contemplate not just what we gain from the carnival when it's happening, but also what we don't gain or our losses, because gains and losses are equally important when we are contemplating carnival futures. And I will pause there. And as the discussion comes around, I may have other things to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tull, for sticking to the time and for providing some kind of context, conceptual, theoretical, in form of this ecosystem that speaks to the issue of the demand side, consumption side, as well as the supply side of this particular event. I would now like to go on to the second presenter. You can call him one of the pioneers in the study of the creative economy in the Caribbean and in the world, and started at a time when the notion was still new. And for a lot of persons in the old economy of oil and gas, it's still new. But I want to welcome Dr. Kieran Niles, who is the principal and CEO of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College in St. Lucia. He has worked as senior economist and advisor on structural policies and innovation at the OECD Development Center in Paris. He's the former WTO chair at the University of the West Indies, where he also served as the director of the Sridhar Ramphal Trade Policy Center and as the executive director of UV Consulting. He serves on the executive bureau of the UN Committee for Development Policy, a subsidiary body of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. He has served as a member of Hemispheric Program Advisory Committee of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture. He's a former member of the Economic Development Advisory Board of the Government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Having said that, I would now like to invite Dr. Kieran Niles to make his presentation. Dr. Niles.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCree. It's a pleasure to be invited to participate in this SALISES webinar on the issue of Carnival and creative industries. All protocols having been observed, I would like to really applaud the focus on this particular issue area, and to thank my co-panelists for coming on board and sharing their ideas and so on. Following on from Dr. Tull, Dr. Joanne Tull, my long colleague, we've been working on these issues and areas for quite a long time now, and we've developed a level of expertise in festival economics in particular, but also in terms of the creative industries. So Joanne has done us a real favor, if you want, a real benefit by contextualizing Trinidad and Tobago Carnival, locating it within the broader construct of what festivals mean around the world, but also taking us in the direction away from what I would call an event-based paradigm into a broader, let's call it industry or ecosystem approach. So I want to thank Joanne for really kicking the ball in that direction. So I think that's where we need to be locating our discussions and our analyses going forward. I've been doing a fair amount of work on the impact of COVID on the creative sector. There's been a massive loss of jobs and livelihoods from COVID. It's well documented. UNESCO has just recently published a report identifying the scale of the losses. What is also important for us to capture, I think, from the current COVID pandemic context are two key elements. One, that public health crises, or if you want to call them disasters, so in this case, disaster generated by a virus. So in fact, it's a bio disease and a biosecurity scenario. If our public health specialists are correct, that this is not a blip on the curve, that we are going to be experiencing more of these emerging diseases circulating around the world and having an impact. And if you look at the last several years, in the last decade or two, we have had SARS, MERS, Ebola, and the list goes on. So if we accept that this is going to be part of our framework going forward, then it means that we have to adopt a different strategy, because when viruses of this sort are circulating, it impacts on human mobility, both within countries and between countries. So let's accept that as if we accept that as a given going forward, then we need to adjust our planning framework for that perspective. The second thing that the COVID and the pandemic has illustrated is the capacity of the global economy to shift towards digital transformation process. And if you look at the data for the ways in which the digital creative economy has expanded at a rapid rate in the last 2 years, meaning that if you look at the various digital platforms, their share of the economic pie, not just in the creative sector, but across all sectors, has expanded very rapidly. It means then that unless we are thinking or managing a process of increasing our participation in the digital creative economy, then we are stuck in an old mode where we are overly reliant on the traditional face-to-face approach to Trinidad and Tobago Carnival. Now, I'm a carnivalist. I love a fete like every other Trinidadian. The human experience, the human touch cannot be replaced by the digital. However, if we take our analysis away from an event-based framework into an industry or ecosystem framework, as Dr. Tull has been suggesting, then it means then that we need to take the digital and invest more in that to assure our position in the global landscape. Otherwise, our share of the digital landscape for this particular event or this particular festival that we call Trinidad and Tobago Carnival will be diminished. Let me give some context for my supposition or proposition here. First off, Trinidad and Tobago Carnival is among the top 3 most nationalized festivals in the world. Right? There are a few countries in the world where you have a higher level of participation of the domestic population in a singular event or festival. So that's the first point. The second point is that it's almost undisputed that Trinidad and Tobago's Carnival is the most globalized event festival in the world. There is no other carnival or festival that has as many offspring, both regionally and internationally, as the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival. We keep thinking, how many carnivals are there? We are not documenting it well enough, but there's in excess of 100 carnivals to be identified all around the world. So what do these two areas of successes mean going forward? Well, first off, I want to agree, as you may well imagine, with Dr. Tull, that now strategy becomes a critical element, and strategy should define the policy framework. If it is, we want to expand both the experience, but also the employment opportunities, the export opportunities, then we need to change our paradigmatic view of how we manage the festival and how we plan for the festival. So for example, the bulk of the discussion that we have generally about the carnival is focused on the event. And the state sector almost exclusively plans and manages Trinidad Carnival from an event-based perspective. So all the discussions I've seen online recently in the last week or two is talking about pods. Like if that really makes a big difference in the world. It does not. What we should be talking about is how can we leverage the brand associated with Trinidad and Tobago Carnival, as well as all of the outputs. All right, so if you look at Trinidad and Tobago Carnival from an industrial or ecosystem standpoint, there are three key critical areas for examination, documentation, and for strategy. The first is the creative industries. So our music industry, our film industry, our book industry, our photograph industry, our costume, design element industries, and you name it, all benefit from or have been propelled globally as a result of the hosting of the Trinidad Carnival and the growth of its offspring. And so you generate a whole industry on that basis. So that industry in itself accounts for several millions of dollars of income to Trinidad and Tobago Carnival.
Excuse me, 2 minutes.
Sure. The second key area is festival tourism. Trinidad and Tobago Carnival is the #1 event or festival in terms of attracting visitors. In a 2 to 3 week period, Trinidad and Tobago Carnival has traditionally attracted somewhere between 35,000 and about 40 to 45,000 visitors. The peak was back in 2000 and 2006, where we received over 42,000 visitors. Since 2000, it's been averaging around 35,000 visitors per annum, which generates, in terms of earnings, close to $30 to $40 million annually. And the peak was in 2017, and 2020 generated somewhere close to $25 to $26 million in earnings, the bulk of which is in accommodation and meals. But in fact, entertainment is the biggest component, accommodation and meals is the second. And then there's the ancillary sectors, whether you're talking about our beverage sector, or whether you're talking about other areas like the advertising sector, the other media elements. They all benefit in a significant way from the uplift of hosting Trinidad and Tobago Carnival. So where does this leave us? Well, I want to say that we need to be framing the process of thinking beyond COVID by identifying the ways in which we can leverage both the digital to transport the carnival to other locations all around the world, and in fact, it'd be virtual. If you look at how Fortnite has been utilizing gaming to promote events, this suggests that there's new opportunities beyond the traditional frameworks that we have been imbibing over the years. The second key point is that from a public health standpoint, we need to be thinking about how we can transition the face-to-face into an amenable mechanism for social interaction. So for example, we have people going in pods, but when they go to the washrooms, are they not going to be commingling? When they go to the cafeteria to get food, won't they be commingling? And so how do you manage in a pandemic context an event-based experience? So those things we need to have greater clarity on going forward. And I'd like to end my comments by saying that Trinidad and Tobago Carnival is a major asset and a strategic asset for the Trinidad and Tobago government and for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We need to give it greater care and attention, and we need to be documenting its impact, its economic impact. We have not been doing so. And so consequently, planning and managing is often done in the dark. We don't know how we're doing this year compared to last year or even 10 years ago. And so that is no longer good enough going forward. Thank you very much. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Keith. And thank you for reminding us the extent to which the local carnival has shaped and defined the global. So much of our scholarship and our theorizing has tended to focus on how the global, however we should define that, in terms of first world, has impacted the local society and economy. But here we have the local carnival, much like Reggae, defining what we see as global and global carnival. I think that is very important. And complementing again the fundamental principle or point of the first presenter, that we need to adopt a more holistic conceptualization or approach to the development of carnival, and shifting from not just event-based to industry-based or ecosystem-based, but the online industry. The online industry that has come about through digitization and the online society, online economy in general, and other important issues related to strategic planning and management, and of course the critical issue you point out of how we need to configure or reconfigure public policy to deal with the whole issue of the impact of health crises on this carnival industry, this carnival ecosystem. So I thank you for that important contribution to the discussion. I would like now to invite our third presenter, Derrick Lewis. Derrick holds a BSc in Marketing and an MBA in International Business from Long Island University. He is the CEO of Eventology and director of Lewis Appliances, a former member, he has also been a former member of the board of governors of NEHRS, an adjunct lecturer at the Arthur Lock Jack Global School of Business, and co-founder of Carnicon, the Global Carnival Convention. An industry leader, entrepreneur, marketing strategist, and educator he is. He has been a change maker for over 20 years in the entertainment and culture sphere, industry, or ecosystem. His brand, Island People, along with mega events, Insomnia, Girl Power, and Amnesia, among others, ushered in an era of innovation in the Caribbean events, carnival, and entertainment sector or industry. I would now like to invite Mr. Lewis to make his 10-minute presentation. So Lewis, over to you.
Good day. Thank you very much for inviting me, and for all those people who are logged on and tuned in. I think this is a fantastic opportunity to learn from different sides of the coin and to understand Carnival from a perspective that is wider, broader than a pod. So with that said, I want to bring my flavor to the team, meaning this is a team. I want to be goalkeeper, I want to be striker. So I've had the opportunity to listen to Dr. Joanne Tull and Dr. Kieran Niles and their perspectives. For me, it broadens what we are looking at and makes it a whole lot more exciting when you understand the width and scope of what the event and Carnival is. Now, I'm asked to speak about the future of Carnival events from a private sector perspective. And it's bordered on a private sector perspective because there's a lot of public-private things that need to happen and do happen. Carnival is not necessarily an event. It is a part of our cultural context. So, you know, when you think about dealing with Carnival from an event perspective, there are events in Carnival, and Carnival is an event itself. So we have to look at it broader as itself and its parts in particular. So I would try to give you an underground feeling about this, meaning I'm going to give you what is happening or what is trending from the ground and from what is happening in the actual industry, as opposed to the analyses that we've gotten and continue to get, which I think is so fulfilling. So first, I want to look at the types of events in the private sector and what is going on. A quick take on what is trending. I then want to go into some of the constructs that would be needed to keep us globally sound and world-class, first in class, hopefully. Finally, I'd like to examine some of the public-private opportunities and partnerships and what might be missing and what we have already missed, but COVID gives us an opportunity to get back in the game. Now, COVID becomes an additional risk. As Dr. Nurse said, an additional risk is just going to be there with us. So having a carnival with COVID is inevitable. It's like saying you're not going to have a carnival with a common cold. And I know over the many years, there's usually a common cold associated with Christmas, Carnival, and summertime when we have visitors here. So let us not fool ourselves into believing that it's going to be post-COVID. So this gives me an opportunity to speak about minimizing the chances of contraction through events, but more than anything else, you know, we're here discussing the future of Carnival, and Carnival has shut down. This shutdown has allowed us to think, to actually, these are the things that I love about this COVID period, and I may be chastised for saying so, but we're here discussing the future instead of working on the present. We would be functioning on trying to do something for Carnival right now, but we're here thinking through and analyzing it, which gives us, you know, which I'm thankful to COVID for. We're not reveling in the past. We're talking about the future, and this is what is needed. And I'm thanking SALISES for doing this and making sure that this is vented. We've gotten time to think, introspect, and we're here now looking at it physically, culturally, socially, and economically. There are 4 pillars, 4 wheels, I would say, but the wheels, Carnival is a great engine, folks. An absolutely fantastic engine. It's a vehicle that we've traveled on, but guess what? The tires are smooth. You know, they're worn, they're deflated. You know, some of you know, there's a sense that the vehicle has shut down because the tires are worn. We need to look at the tires of Carnival, and some of them would be an event, some of them would be policy, some of them be looking at the economic broadscape that we did from Joanne Tull, but I would bring you it from the actual event side. So we need to retread, we need to repair, we need to reinflate our tires. And I think metaphorically speaking, I will talk about what exists, and then and in this discussion, maybe we could talk about how we could reinflate and, you know, retread these tires. So presently, what is, as we return, what exists presently and what would happen in the near future in Carnival? Well, as far as events are concerned, small events and small parties will continue and grow exponentially. Why? Because we're going to evolve the backyard jam philosophy. It's a pod. Your backyard jam is a pod. It will become a pod, and it will be your pod where your friends taking your risk will be invited. And pods will be created larger and larger by inviting more and more people until it probably reaches into events themselves and birth themselves into events, because that's how many events are born. Diamond Vale's breakfast party, I'm a Vale boy, part of that ecosystem and part of the genesis of the Vale vibe. It started as people looking to say, what do we do after Panorama? What's happening after Panorama? We are young, we're ready to rock and roll, and there's nothing really, you know, after. What do you do? So it started at 4 a.m. So things come out and evolve because of pressures put on us. So let me look to say what I believe will happen. Well, there'll be lower attendance. Lower attendance, particularly from mature audiences. Yeah, people with preconditions, people who don't want to vax. There'll be lower attendance from those people. So there'll be no attendance from unvaccinated. So you'd have maybe 25% of people not attending for those reasons. Yeah. There'll also be higher ticket prices. Higher ticket prices because it's based on the increase in the protocols, the event manpower that's needed for it, the technology needed, the testing before the event. It's going to be more expensive. It's probably going to be between 30 and 50% at minimum increase in your ticket prices for what you would receive. And that's because there are less people and you'll have to raise the price in order to reach your margins. What's going to happen in events? There are going to be less events due to the risk. It's higher risk. Risk to reward ratio is gonna not look too good for people wanting to spend money on something and invest in something. So it's gonna be less that way. And there's a conservative government policy, and that conservative policy would maybe raise its head to the detriment of some events in many cases, which I do not blame the government because they're doing the responsible thing. But how it impacts on someone planning an event when, you know, there's no forewarning of what is going on is really difficult for an event planner. Continued steady annual, as Dr. Nurse said, slight decline or maintenance of 35,000 people coming in. It's going to stay about that or decline because of the difficulties in getting into Trinidad and just the COVID process. So comparatively stricter tourism entrance requirements would also cause a decline. But where is the future events going to be? What are we going to do in the future? Well, smaller parties, yes. Traditional fetes will decline, and they have been declining for quite a while. The public events, that is, the WASAs and the army, the fires and stuff. There's one exception, which is the Army Fete, which is seen as safe. Army Fete is the one big noted that I have in my mind right now. There are others that has remained because it is safe and it is seen as disciplined, and it will continue to have a large turnout even in COVID. Because of that reason, it is seen as safe and disciplined. So I expect that to at least be, you know, keep some of its substance, sorry. So artist produced concerts will continue. They have started with Marshall, Kess, Voice will come. Lyrical was last night at Napa. So we will have that as a continuing movement in the industry. Second Star has Second Sunday, and you know there's a lot going on there. All-inclusive events will continue to decline. All-inclusive events are unsustainable model because of how it was constructed and the cost involved. You'll find that what will keep with the all-inclusive events as a trend will be those that are for a cause, a school, an entity, or a reason for going beyond how much you can drink and what type of whiskey they have. Yeah? Now, I guess it's rum because we're drinking good rums now. So we'd have high-end cooler events because that's the opposite to an all-inclusive event. And because of COVID, you're going to have your friends, you're going to have your cooler, you're going to have what drinks you have and you want in there because we're getting more sophisticated as people who are enjoying more sophisticated drinks. So an all-inclusive can't give me even for $1,000 what I drink, the wine that I drink, the champagne that I want, and the things that I want now the expensive rums that I want. It cannot give me my taste. So the high-end cooler events one of them being something like Farmhouse or something like that on Carnival Thursday, will continue. From an event perspective, it will also have a sense of discipline, and it will probably be able to survive the COVID approaches.
Excuse me, Derrick, 2 minutes.
Yeah. So we will have the cause related going forward, but more than that, we would have an opportunity to develop new and interesting events. The breakfast event, as I said, is a new genre that was created in the early 90s, and it has populated the world just like Carnival. Now everybody has events that begin at 2 a.m. in the morning and go on. So these things have to be trademarked, it has to be copyrighted, it has to be franchised, and they have to be earners of foreign exchange for Trinidad and Tobago as they develop themselves going forward. Theatrical events will also become more important because a theatrical event would be something like there's something at Napa on Carnival Monday and Tuesday. These would increase. You would find that happening in the industry. Virtual and hybrid events and events in the metaverse. I see this as probably right now we're a little behind the ball, but there are quite a few things happening in that space that will continue. It's going to be better for Gen Zs, some younger millennials, and definitely it would be for the alphas. It would be the way forward because they have been living the life for the past few years in the Internet of Things. So as a final statement, I wanted to talk about public-private partnerships. There are in industry Boot, there is Bolt, and there are quite a few opportunities to build, own, lease, and transfer. Why aren't there any in this industry? We need to have these. Why is, let's say, Carib, for want of there's no less popular brand. Why is Carib a sponsor of Carnival and not a partner of Carnival as a fundamental infrastructure building entity that builds the Carib Stadium for events? You know, the Mercedes-Benz Stadium is in Los Angeles, and you see it. We need that type of public-private partnerships with event stakeholders to do it. We missed a few opportunities, but I'll talk about them in our discussion because we do have quite a few public-private opportunities, and they are actually organic. They're already happening, and all they need is to be nurtured, and hopefully we get a chance to talk about this in the coming discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Derrick, and thank you for giving us some idea of some of the micro dimension of Carnival, the events that form part of the Carnival industry, Keith and Joanne, and giving us some kind of future perspective on the possible changes that could occur in terms of attendance, in terms of size, in terms of cost, in terms of risk management, and the like, as we, try to deal with both the present and future of Carnival in our context. PPPs, public-private partnerships, have become one of a major policy mechanism that brings the state, civil society, and business together. And I think your call, for us to have more of that is more appropriate now, as all these sectors are under strain. So it's either you unite together, or you disappear or fall together. So thanks for giving us that kind of more business perspective as we try to deal with the fallout from COVID-19 and other general issues relating to the planning and the staging of Carnival and its different products or events. Thank you. I would now like to invite Dr. Franca Devine, who holds a PhD in infectious disease, epidemiology, and public health from Yale University. She has worked in the public health sector to implement and manage several projects, leading to successful disease surveillance programs in the United States. Her experiences include analyzing epidemiological trends to drive decisions at investment banks, working with pharmaceutical companies in the private sector, and serving as the Deputy Director of a Washington, D.C.-based nonprofit organization focused on public health policy. While at CAREC, now CAFA, she worked as an epidemiologist to provide technical assistance to ministries of health to develop disease surveillance tools and to complete outbreak investigations. I would now like to invite Dr. Franca Devines to make her 10-minute presentation. Dr. Devines,
Thank
over to you.
Good morning to the organizers, the panelists, and attendees, and thank you for the opportunity to present this morning. My presentation will focus on managing and hosting Carnival events through a public health lens. And I'll pick up the virtual baton from Mr. Lewis, who spoke about risk, and that's all with respect to the future of Carnival. We will all have to manage risks. And so that's a very important point that Mr. Lewis raised and that I will discuss further. So I will focus on summarizing a guidance framework that governments, health authorities, event planners typically use or can use for taking decisions to hold mass gatherings, and to highlight that these recommended measures will not guarantee 100% protection from SARS-CoV-2 at the individual level, but will reduce the probability of the level of care and minimize the overall impact on the health system. Okay. This here. Right. So, if I can take a dispassionate view of Carnival and Carnival events, from a public health perspective, it's nothing more than a mass gathering. I'm a lover of Carnival. And so when we look at it from a public health perspective, it's nothing more than a mass gathering. And there are certain associated risks with mass gatherings and Carnival in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Because mass gatherings, what is a mass gathering? It's characterized by a concentration of people at a specific location for a specific purpose over a set period of time that have the potential to strain the planning and response resources of the host country or that community. And like for Carnival, for example, mass gatherings can take place as single events or a combination of several events at different venues. For Carnival, we have Panorama, we have Parade of the Bands on the Monday and Tuesday, we have Juve early on Monday, and as Mr. Lewis mentioned, we have numerous fetes and other, we have the Carnival Festival, reenactment as well. So we have many different events going on. And so these gatherings can be associated with an increased risk of transmission and have the potential to strain the planning and response resources of the host country. And that's what public health officials look at. What is the risk of straining the public health system when these events are held? So what are the risks associated with these mass gatherings we have at Carnival time? We have a high density and mobility of attendees, crowding, and that represent a conducive environment for close, prolonged, and frequent interactions between people, which can entail an increased risk. And interestingly, an analysis of mass gatherings held globally in 2020 and last year, 2021, indicated that the most important factors associated with increased risk of SARS-CoV-2 transmission, SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, in conjunction with such events are the duration of the event, the duration of the exposure that we are exposed to others when we are out at these mass gatherings, the location, is it outside, are we inside a building, interior, etc., and compliance. How compliant are the participants as well? And something I would like to add here to compliance, enforcement. So it's wonderful to have a bunch of regulations and guidances, but are they actually enforced? So, and also that the risk of person-to-person transmission was not found. It's to directly correlate with the size of the gathering, which is interesting. So therefore, precautionary measures are required for any size gathering, whether you have 20 persons in your backyard, as Mr. Lewis has mentioned, or whether you're having a larger event with many more persons. So as I mentioned before, just remember that the risk of transmitting SARS-CoV-2 can potentially strain the planning and response resources. And again, governments, stakeholders, public health specialists will look at the risk of disrupting the health services that these events can have. So again, mass gatherings may be planned or they can be spontaneous, but of course, spontaneous events should be kept to a minimum. Since these events likely would not have undergone a proper risk assessment exercise. And then given the substantial social, political, and economic implications, authorities should assess the importance and necessity of a mass gathering event and consider whether it should take place, provided all the public health risks are adequately assessed, addressed, and mitigated. So the decision to restrict, modify, postpone, cancel, or proceed with holding a carnival event should always be based on a rigorous assessment of the risks. It's all about reducing risks. Again, the risks will never be zero, all right? However, we have to minimize the risks going forward. And I mean, Carnival is not at an end. We will, as Mr. Lewis mentioned, they'll probably take different, it'll evolve into many different types of events in the short term, and probably in the long term, once public health officials get a handle on the pandemic, it will then probably emerge into something that a sort of carnival that we're more familiar with in the past. So just know that the WHO has developed risk assessment tools. So I talk about risk. So how are we assessing this risk? And so to facilitate and guide the decision-making process related to holding generic mass gathering events, whether they be a carnival, a fete, whether it's a sporting event, a religious event, etc. But we're focused here on carnival. And so these tools assign a numerical score to each risk factor as a precautionary measure. And I won't get into that tool. So just generally, based on the request for this presentation, events associated with a low or very low risk of SARS-CoV-2 transmission and strain on the health system may be considered sufficiently safe to proceed. So if that event is not likely to cause a strain on the health system in the long term and is considered to be low or very low risk, then the public health, the government would probably then proceed with that particular event. Again, and if the risk of transmitting SARS-CoV-2 remains significant after application of the relevant precautionary measures, postponing or canceling should be considered, as it was in 2020. I want to speak a little bit more here about this risk-based approach. Again, note that zero risk does not exist, right? Therefore, these large events should never be left unmanaged or poorly managed, regardless of their size. And I want to sort of just speak briefly about the fact that this risk-based approach entails 3 steps. You have a risk evaluation, you identify and quantify the risks. You have risk mitigation, where you apply a series of precautionary measures aimed at decreasing the baseline risk. And then you have risk communication to disseminate information proactively. And I want to spend a little more time on risk evaluation. How do we evaluate these risks that exist? And so particularly if you look at Carnival, we'll have to look at the characteristics of the event in terms of the venue, the number of persons, the location, is it indoor, outdoor, the crowd density at some fetes, let's say an army fete would be greater than a crowd density at probably one of the school fetes to some extent. Look at transportation to and from the venue, access to infrastructure, and the duration of the event as well. The longer that we are exposed to one another in any event, in any mass gathering, the more likely we are to become infected. We have to look as well at the number and key demographic characteristics of the expected participants. We might expect that persons who are older may behave in ways different from persons who are younger. We have to look at the age, sex, their health status, and provenance, where are these persons coming from? If you're talking about Carnival, people come from all over the world to Trinidad and Tobago to enjoy Carnival. COVID-19 vaccination status as well. And I want to say something specifically about COVID-19 vaccination status. As you know, many events, and for many events, they require vaccination for you to be fully vaccinated. And so that's all well and good, because the good thing about that is persons planning these events, if they require vaccination, persons to be fully vaccinated, what you're doing there is reducing the risk or the likelihood that anyone who becomes infected at that event, you're reducing the risk of that person becoming severely ill, being hospitalized, or dying. So vaccination reduces risk of severe illness and hospitalization. And therefore, it is a good thing that they require persons to be vaccinated for some of these events. However, be clear that it will not prevent an individual from becoming infected. You may become infected, but at least you won't be become severely ill, less likely to become severely ill. So that's very important.
Franca, two more minutes.
Yes, great. And so, of course, we have to look at closeness of contact and the social identities of those attending. Risk mitigation, just know that precautionary measures should be applied throughout the event's timeline, during the planning phase, the operational phase, and the post-event phase. And these show the different phases for risk mitigation. And for risk communication, I want you to focus on the last bullet point here, where plans should also be made for provision for monitoring infodemics and verifying rumors and countering any false or misleading information as well. So in terms of the key messages, just focus on 6 here, that mass gatherings should never be left unmanaged, poorly managed, regardless of its size, type, and level of associated risk, and that zero risk does not exist. There is always some risk, but what we have to do is ensure that we reduce risk to a level that is acceptable. I've used many references for this short presentation, and I always like to share the references. That's important. Lots of work has gone into for getting the information for this presentation. And I will end here and say thank you. And I hope that very soon we will return to some form of semblance, to some form of normalcy, and we can yet again enjoy the carnival. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Franca, for that important discussion as it relates to public health and public health policy. And it again probably reminds us of the importance of seeing Carnival at the level of an industry or a sector, and the kind of intersectoral linkages that exists as part of that process. And I think the pandemic has brought that into sharper focus. Now, we already have in place a risk assessment for noise, Franca. And I think there have been several Carnival events that have been disrupted or terminated because somebody complains that it's too much noise. And so that kind of assessment exists in relation to noise, and as it speaks to environmental management. And what you are suggesting here has serious implications for stakeholders in Carnival. Who is going to undertake that risk assessment? The state, Derrick and his company, the National Carnival Band Leaders Association. You know, who are the people to undertake this assessment? And the issue of vaccination, there's a whole anti-vax movement happening. And does that threaten the business of Derrick and others, where people are going to boycott his band because, you know, they don't want to be vaccinated? I don't want to preempt the discussion, but your presentation surely raises these important concerns concerning public health policy and its implications for Carnival and its stakeholders. I thank you. I now want to invite Dr. Keela Narka Francis to make her presentation. She's an assistant professor at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. She earned her PhD in Caribbean literature from Howard University in 2012 and continues to research topics in Caribbean literature, culture, and society. She's particularly interested in literature, culture. She's particularly interested, in the secular rituals in the Caribbean and the wider African diaspora. And she has had several publications in this area. Currently, she's working on a monograph on the ritual of Carnival, the litany of a national ritual. Her other projects include an article on the influence of the Black Power movement on Calypso. I would now like to invite Dr. Francis to make a presentation, a 10-minute presentation.
Morning, everybody. All protocols observed, and hopefully I'll stick to the 10 minutes. Oh, I'm still right. Everyone hearing me? No.
Yes, we are.
Okay, good. 10 minutes, nerve-wracking. So I've been invited to talk about Calypso, extempo, and oral traditions in Trinidad and Tobago, prospects for the future. And I want to approach this discussion looking at two meta-issues involving all of these art forms, which would be definitions and the effect of illiteracy on our creativity, and specific to Carnival, also how we define it as a genre and the role of competition. And the mission here is that we want to preserve these art forms and we want to grow the audience, not just now, but in the future. And when I talk about Calypso, I'm talking about the entire family, including extempo, rapso, soca, and the other combinations and evolutions coming out of this music. When I talk about oral traditions in Carnival, we're talking about the speeches of Midnight Robber, Pero Grenade, Wild Indian, Black Indian, Baby Doll, Bookman, and of course the songs of minstrels. So let's look at the meta issues and talking about definition. So not just the history, not just where it comes from, but how it functions on the individual, community, and national level. Not just now, but in the future. And very quickly, I will say that I think I'm focusing on the epicenter of the ecosystem and the idea that beyond an economic activity, Carnival is a ritual or a ritualized festival. It's aggregate, it's fractal. It is meant to unify and rehumanize. And I'll hopefully pick that up in discussion. The other issue we have is how illiteracy affects our creativity. What are we pulling on for our definitions or reimaginations of self, community, and place? This is a wider issue than Carnival. We notice a decline in reading and therefore a decline in a common corpus of inspiration for imagination, something we can pull on, focus, and grow out of. In terms of Calypso itself, when we talk about definition, we're asking what is Calypso as a genre and what is Calypso as a social cultural tool. The second one is a little bit easier to define. Usually we use Calypso and the Calypso family of musics to highlight wrongs or inequalities in society, to liberate in a psycho-spiritual way, to hold up a reflection of what we see going on today. Defining it as a genre is a little bit harder because in its development, Calypso absorbed a lot of folk forms. So we are looking for a definition that is broad enough to accept these folk forms, evolutions, and versions of that we hear today, but also narrow enough that once we hear it, we go, yeah, that's in the Calypso family. And that's something that we are still working on. Competition, in terms of its impact on aesthetics and creativity. So it was formally introduced into Calypso in the late 1800s into the early 1910s to shape the aesthetic. We're talking about a period where most people's reaction to burgeoning, emerging Calypso as noise, as repetitive, as savage or barbarous. And these competitions were introduced to make the music more amenable to Eurocentric aesthetics and appeal. So we had a change in language, we had a change in structure for these competitions. So when your little cup and your little bit of money. Fast forward post-independence, and we talk about the marche gras. And now the situation is in the name of pursuing that monarchy, we have narrowed our expectations of big yard songs, of tent songs, etc., based on the rubric for the competition. Now you find that a lot of Calypsonians would rather get music or lyrics from someone who's already won the competition, who already knows the rubric. So instead of getting 16 independent voices or views at the marche gras, for example, we are now getting about 5 or 6 voices repeated. So the idea of creativity is also being impacted by competition. But let's look at the possibilities then. Presented some issues. So what are the possible ways we can address these issues? First, of course, old chestnut, education. And going off of Paulo Freire's idea here, not just the typical classroom, not just teaching you a subject to regurgitate for an exam, but teaching you education in its broader sense, educat, leading out of darkness. So giving you tools to enlighten yourself. And when we talk about music specifically, not just to respect the form, but also to love it. And in our current situation, we do not encourage love of a subject. We only encourage know the history, know the dates, explain it in writing, but not that appreciation, not that love. It works for classical music, for example. Not that 100% of people who are exposed to classical music in their music class suddenly develop a taste or preference for classical music only, but the people who do, we cannot exclude how exposing them to loving the art form affects their eventual appreciation of the art form. Also, we need that epistemological shift when we talk about reading for pleasure, instead of reading and literacy being that for utility, knowing what the word is on the page, enjoying it. And we, as people outside of the education system and within the education system, can inculcate a love of reading for pleasure, keeping a home library, rewarding people for reading, letting them read whatever they want, reading ourselves and letting them know that reading is fun, associating it with something fun and love. So reading with your child, or even just letting your child tell you about what they read, will inculcate in them an idea that reading is something that can be enjoyed and shared. And thirdly, rearticulation of carnival, calypso, extempo, and oral traditions generally. Rather, I mean, disabusing ourselves of the idea that just because it's African derived, it excludes other ethnicities in the community. This is not the case. Quite frankly, if carnival was not African derived in Trinidad, you would not see the level of participation you see now. It actually made it more inclusive than when only the French participated. It also speaks to our very bad habit of defining our art forms based on the race or nationality of the person performing it. And we need to move beyond that, because as has been said on the panel, Carnival is a national festival, right? And regardless of the origins, while we like to maintain the origins and the traditions that come along with the origins, it does not mean that other races, other ethnicities, other sexualities, and so on cannot participate in this national ritual and festival. And also understanding that our carnival fits into a larger cultural area, an ever-expanding larger cultural area. So we have the Caribbean region, we have the Black Atlantic, we have the diaspora. And understanding how our practices and our traditions relate to other practices and other traditions gives us a better sense of self and understanding.
Excuse me, 2 more minutes.
Yes, well, I'm pretty much done, except to say that I focus on the idea of definition and redefining and understanding what carnival is, because before we could properly implement policy, plan, and move forward, if we have partial understanding of what we're doing, as Dr. Tull and Dr. Nurse and everyone has been saying, if we don't understand the full spectrum of this ecosystem, we will not understand how to preserve and promote the ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kayla, to borrow from Trinidad Rio. Thank you for taking us back to basics in terms of the issue of defining what carnival means, what calypso means, very much where Joanne started, defining how carnival has been conceptualized, but in the context of its restrictive definition as an event. But thanks for broadening that and looking at the importance of definitions, because definitions are political, they are problematic, and they have implications for how we see carnival, how we develop carnival. They have implications for the issue of nationalism and national identity, you know, and that has been part of the history of carnival. Thanks for bringing that to reminding us of the importance of definitions as they impact development and participation. I was hoping that in defining calypso, you would have drawn on Mighty Duke or Chalky, or of course, David Rudder. As a Rudderite, I can't miss the opportunity to refer to Rudder calypso music. But thanks again for you know, reminding us of those important fundamentals in this industry. I would now like to introduce our final speaker, Dr. Kieran Niles, who is a lecturer with the Institute of International Relations at the University of the West Indies. As the Tobagonians would say, are we boy? Dr. Niles has been doing research on the link between cultural industries and international trade in the Caribbean since 2008. Within the last 5 years, his research has also focused on assessing cultural industries as a pathway to low carbon and circular economic growth. He is also the managing director of Koru Green Limited, a firm dedicated to commercializing creative content throughout the Caribbean. Koru Green provides management, marketing, and research support to creative professionals who wish to find new markets for the content they produce and or to expand the consumption of their works within markets in which they already exist. I would now like to invite Dr. Niles to make his 10-minute presentation. Dr. Niles.
So good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'll ask some basic questions. Of course, I want to welcome everybody. All protocols have already been observed by panelists that have gone before me. But I want to ask some very, very basic questions. Because as I see it, I think the question that I want to ask is, who is this for? What is it meant to accomplish? And what are the key social, cultural, and economic objectives of this festival? Why do I ask those basic questions? I ask those basic questions because, in my respectful view, COVID has exacerbated problems are related to an unclear vision and unclear strategy to develop the festival that predated the pandemic. So it just made things that were bad worse, as far as I'm concerned. And so, I mean, Calypso is how we tell our stories, right? So it's remembering Alison Hines saying, winding up in a Juve band with a sexy Maruga man. And thinking deeply about what that means in terms of Juve itself being a symbol of equality and freedom. I still remember stories, you know, when I was much younger of vagrants dancing with lawyers and doctors and no one knew who was who. And we watched that become this increasingly exclusive, commoditized experience from that very, very, very cosmopolitan, very, very mixed experience to very expensive fetes, which few can afford, to all-inclusive bands that really reduces the demand for street vendors on the road, to outsourcing the production and manufacture of costumes. And I think that these are bad things in and of themselves, but we have to kind of admit to ourselves that Carnival in itself has become very, very stratified in some ways. And I mean, this has already been alluded to, but we've gone from really strict social commentary and self-expression to shows, competitions, and concerts, sometimes with kind of exorbitant cash prizes, paid for by the public purse. And these shows are not even produced for international broadcast necessarily or for international consumption. And they, in some ways, dwarf many aspects of the festival that are meant to promote cultural heritage. In many ways, we fail to reinvent or reimagine the carnival tents. There are 52, at least, 52 regional carnivals in the Trinidad and Tobago. Those are festivals that happen all over the country. So you have to ask yourself, who is this for? We would always speak about tourism and festival tourism and having persons come here to consume and to participate in the festival. But obviously it's not just for them. I don't know to what extent we actually order these things for them at all. To what extent do we use what we do to really brand the country strategically? Who is it for? Is it for us? Is that why we have some of these shows that start at 3 p.m. and end at 3 a.m.? Is that for tourists? Is that for us? And I'm not saying these are not bad things, these are not good things, but I am saying that we should at least be able to answer that question. You have a festival now. This is my topic. For those of you that may not know, is the COVID pandemic and the internationalization of the TT Carnival brand and the prospective implications of Trinidad and Tobago. In truth and fact, you have a festival that's really been internationalized by the private sector. And the private sector has an understandable focus on commercial returns. And what they do is they offer, and this has already been said, they offer experiences associated with the festival, but based on their own interpretation and version of our carnival brand. And that approach has led to somewhat of an internationalization of the festival. Keith spoke about this in at least 100 countries all over the world. But internationalization kind of strangely and maybe misleadingly implies that there is some kind of central strategy to this actually happening. There is none. What's happening is something that is far more fragmented, something that is done by disparate groups with disconnected objectives. So is there a real link between the concerts held by local artists overseas and our local carnival brand? Of course there is. Is it a strategic intentional linkage? No. Is there a significant budget for international advertising of the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival that can be accessed by local creative practitioners going overseas? Is there a significant budget? I guess the real question there would be, is there a budget at all? We don't know that there might be. I think that there could be one. If you go to the ministry and make a proposal, they may find the money to do it. But in other Caribbean nations, just for an example, you routinely would approach the tourist boards and they will help to brand your event with a country brand. That's the routine, that's the norm. And what COVID has done is that it has highlighted the lack of a cohesive system structure, if you want to use the cliche term, which few people understand, an enabling environment to facilitate growth and development of a local ecosystem, or the internationalization of that local system. So COVID really showed us, okay, you have a lot of Trinidad and Tobago artists that decide now to go to Miami because there's nothing happening here. How does that help to really internationalize our brand? You know, I would definitely agree with what Keith said. It's not really about pods at all. If we took the millions of dollars that we spent on constructing pods or whatever we're doing in Savannah, and we spend that on advertising, international advertising of Trinidad and Tobago Carnival and of our brand, would people become upset? Would we understand why we're doing that? Is there a strategy for doing that? But people do get upset when other people try to leverage our brand and the things that we do. So when Michael B. Jordan tries to trademark Juve to make an alcoholic drink, people get upset. But we didn't trademark it. We're not trying to leverage that brand. We weren't trying to do it in a strategic way beforehand. Be upset when someone else does it. And Dr. Francis just mentioned this, so I'll get into just a little bit. I think I'm nearing my 2-minute mark, so I'm just being very, very careful here. So, what is Calypso and what is soca?
You're right.
This is not
2 minutes.
Yeah, I am. That is my 2-minute mark, right?
Yeah.
Let's be clear about this. This is not rocket science. There are ethnomusicologists in our own country and around the world that help countries and cultures to help come up with a framework to define what this thing is. That's really, really important. It was done for reggae. And ethnomusicologists were able to sit down in a participatory way and define, okay, this is actually what reggae is. And what that allows for the private sector, for bands, I'll come to that just now, for musicians, it allows them to say, okay, it allows, Nielsen and Billboard to say this is reggae, and so they can build a reggae Billboard chart. They can have an international framework and say this is reggae and this is not reggae. That's why a couple of years ago, the top 10 reggae songs throughout the world were non-Jamaican. None of them were Jamaican, because the whole world could have participated. And I mean, I'll be very transparent about this. I have been kind of really pressing our own government to take up the mantle and begin this work of genre formalization. It's important. Why? Because there is no soca genre when you go on some of these international platforms. AudioMac and Spotify have already begun to exercise some curatorial influence in terms of defining what is soca. And if we don't take the lead, you'll get vexed when other people begin to say this is soca and this is calypso. And we have less influence over determining where these brands go and what these products become. And we also get engaged in ridiculous debates when bands like Freetown Collective, Calpi, and artists like Jimmy October begin to call things new calypso. You know, and people begin to say, what is that? Well, that is art. It evolves. But there has to be an intentionality behind how we try to leverage what we're doing here. So I just want to say that COVID-19 has exacerbated the deficiencies that already existed before. And if we really are going to become more strategic about its internationalization, we first need to decide what we want this festival to be, and right now, and what we want it to become, and then we need to invest the resources required to make that a reality around the globe. Until we do that, well, I don't think very much will change. That's it for me. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Kieran, and thank you very much for sort of ending where the discussion started on emphasizing the importance for an ecosystem, and COVID-19 would have probably reinforced the need to have such an ecosystem, it would have reinforced the reality that it does not exist. And you know, again, you emphasize the need for such an ecosystem that is well structured, well coordinated at a local, regional, and global level, that is based on appropriate branding, marketing, budgeting, planning, and policy making among the people who constitute and who drive this particular industry and who drive this ecosystem. So who Carnival is for, who Calypso is for, probably that could lead us into the discussion. But in terms of my response, it's for the Caribbean and the diaspora, and it's for the development of our society through culture and all its riches, you know, and the creators and inventors of the various traditions and the promoters like Derrick. It's for all of us, if I may say. We have at least 1 hour, probably 55 minutes to engage in some questions and discussion. I would call out questions as they appear on the chat. So there might be a delay. While I read, I may have to do some editing. But the first question that arose after Dr. Tull's presentation was, is there a difference between ecosystem and industry? That's the first one. And there's another question here from Lamar Pollard. What of the prestige school events, Fatima, Bishop's, Curacy, etc.? Will they decline or pivot and thrive? Derrick, that seems to be directed to you. I have a question for Dr. Devine. That is from Francis Hanson Lewis. I have been reading about a new generation of vaccines, nasal spray, which is supposedly more likely to stop infection. How soon might those vaccines be available? And what is your opinion on how much lower the risk will become, especially in relation to these events? Can I have a response to these questions? I would generally take the approach of asking a batch of questions, 3 or 4.
If Joanne is there?
Yes, should I go first?
Go ahead, shoot, Joanne. I just don't know.
Sure, certainly. Well, yes, there's a difference. The industry, which deals with the business side, commercialization, the production of cultures and cultural production, would be part of the entire ecosystem. The ecosystem in of itself would encompass not only the industry, but also the creative work, whether it be for commercialization or just for aesthetic, for the purpose of enjoyment. The ecosystem, by extension, therefore, would encompass for the carnival, the traditions, heritage, educational institutions such as the CFA, the private sector, governance. 10 minutes did not allow me to get into that, but most certainly, and this is where the problem lies, as a matter of fact, because we do not look at it as an ecosystem, our opportunities to see beyond the past and the now are limited in scope. In addition to which, you would find then that the policy tends to be reactive and it tends to be demand driven, as I was suggesting earlier on. When you take into consideration the entire ecosystem, you then begin to think of futures in terms of what do you need to invest in your society. For example, in terms of the young persons coming up, whether they may want to be creatives, carnival creators, or carnival entrepreneurs, because there's always that. What of those who are interested in engaging in the digital environment? Because our future, especially if you think about what Keith and Derrick were saying, we have to be looking at a carnival that is of some kind of balance. There's a hybridity where we should be trying to take advantage of that digital environment. And I suppose in that regard, that is where a lot of what Karen was saying just now would have resonance. So that my idea or the notion of ecosystem I'm glad I was first, actually. I think it's an important foundation because this is where we need to turn our mind frame around and stop thinking about this experience only. And allow me, Chair, just to say a little bit about that. And I think I heard it, Karen said something about it in terms of tourism. At which point in time did Trinidad and Tobago say that Carnival is a festival tourism product? I await that. I know it for Barbados. I know it for St. Lucia, Grenada. Dr. Nurse, help me where we went, Cayman Islands, St. Kitts. Tell me, because I don't remember that. And you see, that is part of it. Because again, if that is not your scope, in the terms of strategy being limited, and that's okay, then it means you have to be giving consideration to your ecosystem. It means that I should be working with Dr. Devines to talk about the economic impact of the taste of Carnival vis-a-vis health. And we have not reached there. We don't have those mechanisms, those tools. And I am not an economist, colleagues, so that is not my work. But I would certainly love to have the tools, the framework that would allow us to do that kind of analysis, that we could really seriously contemplate sustainability. And so I stick by that idea, my notion of ecosystem, and I'll stop there.
Thank you. Dr. Devine, any take? Derrick?
Yes, for the question from the attendee on the question about nasal vaccines and whether there's supposedly more likely to stop infection. I'm reading the question or comment here. I'm not saying that. So as you know, vaccines undergo several stages of clinical trials, phase 1 through 3. And so these provide the evidence whether or not a vaccine or any medical intervention is effective. So with respect to the nasal spray vaccines that are being developed, until the phase 3 clinical trials provide us with some evidence, it's difficult to say. It's impossible to say whether it'd be more likely to stop infection. How soon might those vaccines be available? It would depend on the vaccines being effective and safe. And another part of the question, what's my opinion and how much lower the risk will become? I can't answer that question without the results of clinical trials where we compare those vaccines to the vaccines that are currently available. So in short, we need to wait on the results from these trials before we can make any predictions as to how the availability of these vaccines might lower risk going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Veen. Since you're in the spotlight, there's another question here. If we see public health as the development of mind and body, how do we plan or rethink the carnival other than materialist consumption or expression?
How do we rethink the carnival in terms of?
Outside of seeing it as having to do with materialist consumption and expression.
That's a question for a public health specialist. I'll answer that. So I'll answer that question with a question. How
do you situate the issue of public health in the context of a festival that has been socially constructed in a particular way, as gay abandon and merriment and get on bad?
Absolutely. So I suppose, in terms of reducing our risk, we have to take personal responsibility as well. So I think there's some level of understanding that what is the norm at carnival time in terms of our behavior, in terms of being very close to one another. Obviously, that is something that we have to consider and consider how we would manage the gay abandon that is carnival. That is what carnival is all about. I mean, talking about mass gatherings, it sounds rather dispassionate, but carnival, the essence of carnival to me is to be around people, from my perspective, It's in terms of the expression of the art form, to be out there and to experience that, as well as to, communicate that sense of festivity and belonging. So in terms of how that is managed, given what was going on last year from a public health perspective, it was prudent to postpone or cancel Carnival last year. We had to, given the strain that the pandemic placed on the public health system. What we're seeing this year with the evolution of and the emergence of additional variants, the Omicron, etc., where we think they seem to be, less severe illness with less persons being hospitalized. There's a less of a strain on the public health system at this time, and therefore they would have to, the public health officials would use the prevalent situation to determine what can be done and what cannot be done. So to frame, as a public health issue, risk has to be continually assessed. And based on the risk at that given time, then the types of events that we can move forward with will have to be determined and decided on by public health officials and the government. So again, we have these policies, but again, the risks have to be quantified, and then based on what the risk profile is, then decisions are made as to what types of activities can be allowed. Hope that answers that question.
Okay, thank you. If there are no responses to the first set of questions, I would ask a fresh batch of questions.
I have a response to a question directed at me.
Okay, so yes, Derrick.
But you can go ahead. We can always do it later.
That was the bishop's question. What about these events? Is it that particular one?
Yes.
Yes, you may go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. For me, and I would reiterate that these types of events, which are school-related or cause-related events are the fastest growing area in events for the past 15 years. So if there's a cause, there's a reason beyond having a good time, it is always a better base and foundation for having an event. So if you went to St. Francois or you went to Bishop's, there is a reason beyond for you to support, not just partake in the event. So they will continue to develop things like if it's a blood bank or if it's something that works beyond in the altruistic areas, those events will sustain because people will invest in them for other reasons. So I just wanted to say that is what I would consider to be the moving forward, which would move forward.
Okay, thank you. Any other immediate responses? I would go to
Roy, if I may.
Yes, Keith.
I want to, and if I come piggybacking on the question that I saw posted by Kieran, which is who is the carnival for? And I think there's the elephant in the room, which I don't think we have grappled with well enough. My system blanked out for a bit, so I missed a few minutes of the presentations. But if you look at the participation rate for Trinidad and Tobago Carnival in terms of audiences at major events, the numbers have declined considerably. Okay, so last Carnival, 2020, I went into Port of Spain on Carnival Monday. In the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, nothing going on. It's dead. You go to the savannah on a Carnival Tuesday, there is nobody in the savannah. There was hardly anybody around the savannah either. So if part of the ecosystem is the audience, where is this audience? It has diminished, declined, and so on. You also see a process of gentrification taking place among all the events, which is that with the growth of all-inclusive and even cooler fets and whatever else, the events that are taking place are moving increasingly towards the middle classes. So what about the working class? What about ordinary people? As Derrick indicated, those big fets like WASA and Fire and Army, he said Army still holds some prominence, but they've declined because of issues of security and so on. So where are ordinary people fetting? Are they fetting somewhere else in a cooler fet, or are they going to all-inclusives? So one of the key metrics that we have not been capturing, so nobody knows how many people participate in Trinidad and Tobago Carnival. We've never done a study. We talk about it as being the Mecca, we make all kinds of loud pronouncements, but they are completely baseless. We have no data, we have no evidence. So when I started off my presentation, I indicated that Trinidad and Tobago Carnival has one of the highest levels of national participation. I had done some work, must be like 15, 20 years ago, where we tried to capture that data. So we knew how many people had passed through the Savannah on Carnival Tuesday, for example, how many bands, how many steel bands, etc. But nobody is doing that continuous work. We also knew how many people were in the various stadiums. We also knew how many people were participating in the 50+ mini carnivals all over Trinidad, in Rio Claro, up in Point, in Tobago, wherever. All right, so we have this notion that Trinidad and Tobago Carnival is what happens in Port of Spain, but there's all kinds of things happening in other locations and jurisdictions. So the point is this, as a national festival, we have not been strategically, one, documenting the participation rate, and secondly, we are not finding out what do ordinary people want. So are they watching paraded bands more on television than before? We don't know. Is it that people are now going on Facebook or Instagram to access the content regards to Carnival and are participating virtually through those mechanisms? We don't know. All right. So there's a whole range of imponderables which are really critical, because if you don't have a domestic audience and a domestic participation rate, and if it is in decline and in terminal decline, then the golden goose that laid the egg is going to disappear. I would talk also, if later on, if you get a chance, about the production elements. So if you look at the design elements, from costumes to other areas like our the music and so on, those are also in relative decline compared to what's happening in other jurisdictions in the world. So we are not, Derrick talked about the wheels on the car being deflated. Well, in terms of audience participation, that is the tire that has been deflated the most. So back to you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Keith. Just to note, in 1991, yes? Derrick?
Chair, I
Sorry,
also
you
respond a bit to that. Derrick, you go ahead.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
So that was me, or that was I actually
Sorry,
raised my hand, but
Karen,
Derrick, if you
my apologies.
Okay, Karen.
Karen.
Yeah.
no, that's okay, that's okay. So I wanted to so I was the person that asked who is this carnival for, and Keith kind of summed it up really brilliantly. As I think he knew what I was going to say, so I'm really happy that he just said it, because the point of using the word ecosystem is not just because we're trying to sound sophisticated as lecturers or as teachers. That's not the point. The point is there is a real connection, as there is in the ecosystems, between the cultural heritage, between people's participation and the experiences on the ground. As we say, there's a real connection between the things that we cannot make money from and the things that we do make money from. There's a real tangible, one is the seedbed for the next. You know, so if you do not do the work in the schools of teaching people about the heritage, about the pan, about the baby doll, who is going to produce these things later on? You understand? So the reason why we use the term ecosystem is because it's not just to differentiate and to show branches going all over the place. It's to say, listen, these things are connected. And if you do not pay attention to one, if you don't pay attention to the participation in Port of Spain, there will be consequences on you. And just to be, again, I love being transparent, right? I was, I'm saying I don't do it anymore. COVID definitely mashed it up. I used to be a vendor in Port of Spain during Carnival for years. I used to sell corn soup with a shameless plug, Sweet Hand Gourmet in Grandstand. And I, shameless plug, but we used to sell pullover, all that kind. And listen, you get to see from that level what's actually happening because you feel it. They feel it in their pocket. Mm-hmm. They feel it when let me just say this, right? When 200 people can pass you and nobody stops, because everything that they need, they have. You feel that because it's not free for you to be there. So I don't want to get. Let me I just being very real about it, right? Sorry, go ahead. But the point I'm making as well is the lofty statements that we make sometimes you don't realize the actual impact that it has. So I also mentioned the festival tourism thing for Spita because there are several statements in our national cultural policy right now. The only one that we've had ever, the white paper that was published, that actually makes some statements about this thing, but there are no legs in it, which is the point that Joanne was making. There's absolutely no legs. So, there is, without trying to be a little dispassionate about this thing, because I really believe in action research in terms of being involved, which is, so I manage a group of Freetown Collective, and they're very passionate about New Calypso. When we talk about the thing, about what we're trying to accomplish, you realize that when you try to get support, there is no support. That's number one. When you think that there's a wider framework, there is none. Mm-hmm. And when you grow up hearing these stories about the actual function of Carnival in society in terms of social integration, mm-hmm. in terms of getting to know people you've never met before, and you get on the street and you realize, oh, it's only the middle class here. You realize that there are functions that are totally absent and they have consequences for the wider society later on, which is why the lack of measuring these things and really talking about them openly is deleterious to a functional and healthy society. I'll stop there because I don't want to say much.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask another batch of questions. I know this thing can evoke, particular responses because of people's deep attachment to this. But in the context of time limits, I want you to be as detailed and succinct at the same time. All right, if that is possible. So let me ask a fresh batch of questions and you all can jump in as you see fit. Is the cultural focus on events also deflating innovation and creativity? Events like Carnival, Christmas somehow become the caucus of the art form, and therefore outside of the events, the art form does not enjoy influence. How do you, Dr. Francis, envision the future of the oral traditions of Carnival if high song pressure levels persist? And there's particular reference here to a study looking at the impact of these, trucks, with their big speakers and so on. Will they move to the metaverse? Why are we taking so long to apply futuristic outlook and application of technology to improve management of the festival? Why are we taking so long to apply futuristic outlook and application of technology to improve management of the festival? Any responses? Please elaborate on the idea of the internationalization of the Trinidad-style Carnival on the backs of the private sector. Please elaborate on the idea of the internationalization of the Trinidad-style Carnival on the backs of the private sector.
Chair, would it be possible for you to repeat the first question, if you don't mind? I was listening to that, but I didn't understand the latter part. What was the question posed again in that last batch, the very first one you raised?
Okay, is the cultural focus on events also deflating innovation and creativity? Okay, events like Carnival Christmas somehow become the focus of the art form.
Okay.
And therefore, outside of the events, the art form does not enjoy influence.
I did want to address that. I think it's really important that we give indication to the fact that the culture will always be important. The arts and culture are the foundation, is the bedrock of popular culture forms, cultural production, the production of culture. It would never be the thing to detract. And as a matter of fact, when you look at the carnivals and the festivalesque as a whole, it is that culture that gives the, what we would say in marketing, the USP, the unique selling point. The idea of authenticity and indigenization that is embedded in the culture is what people, what excites people to come. I always like to give the example, years ago, we were in the midst of doing this work, and I recall Keith were on a few boards. I was managing the Nice Belt Fund, working with the Montanos. I believe by then the CFA was connected to island people. We were just all in the mix of it. And I recall a scenario where coming off of this event, La Barge, down the islands. I don't know how many people here would know about that, but that would have been a very popular event that would have been targeted primarily at the contemporary side, those visiting and all of that. In essence, not the culture vultures, let's put it like that. But guess what? We had a group of people here, and as we were going down Travery Road, they wanted to stop and hear the pan. They were taking pictures of the frames and the pan going down the street. The point is this: even if they don't go and directly consume it, it needs to be present. It is always part and parcel of your offering. And I believe that as soon as Trinidad gets to the place where they understand, it's not just the who is for, you know, but what it is and what it can be. I think that it will start to make life a lot easier. The connections between the culture and the way in which it was advanced in the question, and though the culture bearers, I should say, in terms of what was advanced in the question and governance would become easier. That remains a disconnect that is in need of serious address. And I would dare say that, and I don't really want to touch a taste of Carnival, to be honest, but I would dare say that when you look at this current scenario, that gap is very obvious. The culture bearers do not only rest within the SIGs, but they are beyond the SIGs. They're in communities and in other NGOs, and therefore that engagement is very much necessary if you want to maintain that USP. This Taste of Carnival really could have been used as an opportunity, to be honest, and it could have been seen as a period of not rest and reflection, but R&D and reflection, research and development and reflection. And I'll pause for my colleagues to give.
Okay, thank you. Just allow me, panelists, to give a context to one of the questions. The Carnival moved to other metropolitan centers and enclaves of Caribbean people before the explosion of private sector bands or brands. Trinis and other Caribbean persons who migrated took it abroad for cultural reasons long before economic or financial reasons. Please elaborate on the idea of the internationalization of the Trinidad-style carnival on the backs of the private sector.
Can I jump in here? So I kind of
Yes.
want to piggyback off of Dr. Tull first.
Yes.
And as all these questions are being raised, I do want to raise the historical point that the carnival we're talking about, that we're trying to assess, was always trying to be killed, snuffed out, and changed, because it represented an aesthetic and a point of view that was not supportive of either pre-colonial or even post-colonial governance. It has been under the influence to be changed, reshaped. So when we're talking about the gentrification, we are seeing the product of a very long history of people trying to reshape what was going on the street. When you read the original sources from the 1900s, the Victorian papers, what was going on the street was ugly. It was grotesque. It was something to be gotten rid of, and they could never get rid of it. So for one, I would say Carnival will not die, but the question about focusing on events and seasons, that has been the approach from time because they want to stamp it out. Mind you, what we call now our traditional characters would have found any opportunity, Carnival found any opportunity to stick fight. So when they banned them originally in Carnival, they moved to Christmas and then they moved back to Carnival. They started in Emancipation, moved to Carnival, moved out to Carnival, moved back, and they come back. And is that expression of rebellion? Yes. And so when we take it overseas, to jump into that question about how it transforms overseas, why we take it. And I tell my class, it's half a joke, I'm being facetious, but not. Anywhere a Trinidadian lands, a carnival will develop. Now, outside of policy, outside of an overt definition, a lot of Trinidadians who participate in carnival have a very visceral connection to it, right? And so they want to repeat it. But it does depend on your level of participation before you left. It does depend on your class, your race, your orientation, because Carnival has, we like to say all we as one, and we like to say it's this nationalist unifying, which it can be, but at the same time, it was always participated in along class lines. That's why you had uptown mass, that's why you had downtown mass, that's why you had the fancy bands emerging in the late 1800s versus the Cambole bands that turned into the Tambu Bambu bands that turned into our steel bands, et cetera, et cetera. And this is something that it's documented, it's there, but somehow it doesn't enter the conversation we like to have about Carnival. We love the myth of all we as one. And until we start to address the idea that Carnival is far more complex, Carnival has multiple functions and services, multiple people. And it can be that kind of inclusive, but don't try to force then that it must be one or the other. And I feel like I'm going to ramble, but the one other thing I want to say about that in terms of how we transfer, how we grow, how we think about it is understanding its complexities, one, and understanding that there is a difference between culture and tradition. And when, as you talk about, Dr. Niles, with the new Calypso, this new emerging format, a lot of the pushback is that we hold on to tradition versus allowing culture to evolve. Culture evolves to fulfill the needs of a society. So when the needs change, either organically or in our case, a lot of the times because of hegemony, it was artificial, but we ain't talk about that yet either, right? So when the needs of the society changes, the culture will evolve. If we hold on and we fight for a traditional form versus the function of that tradition, we're gonna kill the culture. Because the young people are going to go, that's an old people thing. And they're not going to engage in it, participate it, love it, and expand it.
Okay, thank you, Keela. I would have to ask panelists to respond, take 2 minutes to respond, just so that we could spread, the conversation and the questions around. There was a question relating to the role of private bands in the internationalization, stroke commercialization of Carnival.
Yeah, so I think that's either for me or for Derrick. I'm going to take a first stab at it really quickly because I spoke about internationalization, particularly as it relates to the private sector. Now, I want to draw you back into why we keep talking about an ecosystem, an ecosystem, an ecosystem. What the diaspora does, and I'm glad somebody just said it, also as a form of resistance, as a form of saying, listen, we are occupying this space and we are proud to be who we are, is really important. You understand? But is it that our statecraft in Trinidad and Tobago then seizes upon that opportunity to say, let us then brand our own country brand based on what those people are doing, resistance or no, none of that actually happens. When that does happen, it is because a business person usually goes over and says, I am going to make money. You understand? And I'm going to have these big traders and you're going to put a massive visit Trinidad and Tobago on the side and then negotiate a deal. You understand? So that is what I meant by how the private sector has tried to internationalize and to be very, very specific. There are so many things happening at the same time. And yes, let's not try to simplify what's happening, right? Oversimplify what's happening. You have people that are doing things that are innovative, and that will always happen. People doing things just as social expressions. And so the same thing that we would do at 4 a.m. about these things that are going on in our society, how we would use mass, at least for many years, to critique the society is the same way that a Trinidadian would move to New York or move to the US and wake up at 4 a.m. and do something similar about George Floyd. You understand? But is that being leveraged? No. What's actually usually being leveraged is the private sector, the commercial expressions of it. Because it's easier for me as a business person to go and argue to the government, you will get a commercial return on this. And let's just also be very clear about this. The arguments of commercial return are usually privileged well over and above the arguments about using this as a social movement or to boost Trinidad and Tobago's soft power, which to be honest is valuable in and of itself. So as an international relations person as well in the discussion, and this is something as well that I used to work with Kieran and Joanne. Sorry, I'm done. I was going to talk about soft power and international political economy, but I think let me stop there because my 2 minutes is up.
Okay, there's a question here from Carissa Lee from CNC3, directed to Dr. Keela Francis. What are your thoughts on Tuku pulling out of this year's competitions to save the brand?
That question might put me in trouble because of where I am.
Answer.
But I have been saying for the longest while we really need to rethink competition and the role of competition. And is competition doing what we claim it does? The claim is that competition fosters creativity. But if you are looking at fitting a rubric and changing your voice to fit a rubric, are you really being creative and expressive? Or are you kowtowing to what you think the audience wants? It speaks to a larger problem that we have developed because no one is going to compete without a cash prize. And so on the one hand, we need our creatives to make $1 and eat a food. Otherwise, creativity will cease altogether. But it shouldn't be through a tool that will allow state control on an expression and an art form that is not necessarily anti-state, but has the potential or gives us the space to voice serious critique of the state. And that is the problem with the competition. So on a very personal level, from my ideology, I have no problem at all. I don't think competition should come back. There's a lot of work to be done for that to make sense for other people. And it depends on who you talk to in the Tuku fraternity, right?
Okay.
So,
okay,
my opinion.
Okay, thank you. There is a question thrown out to everyone about comments on this year's Taste of Carnival. Should the NCC just sit it out? You know, there are two sides, protecting the brand, but also assisting those who depend on the sector for a living. Did planning start late or start too late, I assume, for this Taste of Carnival? So what are your views on the Taste of Carnival? There's also a question in relation to pods. Pods are not the solution. So how do we move forward? Maybe the first 5 things we need to look at. You said COVID gave us an opportunity to look at Carnival. Pods are not the solution. So what is?
I think is it open to answer? Is it open to answer the question?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, it's open forum.
I think I want to come back to Karen and everyone to try to sum up my feelings about this exciting panel and the questions that are coming from people. And it's tough to say this, but I think Trinidad and Tobago suffers from an identity crisis. So when Dr. Niles spoke, he talked about, let us distill what is our music and find out about it, analyze it, and get a discovery there. But I think the discovery, and Karen, I'd love to join you in this discussion further. I think it's further back. I think we have to figure out who we are. We don't know. And until we figure out who we are, we can't know what we play and why we play it. So put it this way, could anyone tell me here what our national dance is? What our national dress is? What our national food is? So if you're thinking about culture and you cannot speak to definitively tell a young person why, what is the national dance? When they get up and wind down on the ground, on the stage and stuff, you can't complain. Because they are in another, they haven't been given the identity and the grounding as to what is supposed to be and what isn't supposed to be. So we've had, for me, we've had a lot of that issues. And I think we need to develop the brand by finding out who we are. Napa was not built for our culture. It was built, as far as I could remember, for our interpretation of other cultures as a showcase. So we have to understand that we don't know who we are. And until we have that discovery, we cannot market ourselves, our music, our culture, or anything else. So I wait to join that discussion because I have thought about this so long and I'm pregnant with it.
Thank you, Derrick. Since you are the spotlight, this question is for everyone. What strategies can be recommended for bilateral trade and sister city partnerships through Carnival with countries in Africa like Nigeria and Ghana? These are countries with similar carnival traditions and huge population sizes. Imagine if trade and investment in carnival culture could be encouraged through public policy engagement between the two countries. This is coming from Okama Ikebrook.
Yeah, I took Marshall. Let me just jump on this one quickly. I took Marshall Montano many years ago to Bahia, Brazil, with the United Nations. I consulted with the United Nations and I took him to see what could be done with music. And we then came back to Trinidad and Tobago going to the Brazilian embassy and the Trinidad consulate to try to twin the cities of Bahia and Port of Spain. The Bahia and the government of Brazil was very, very impressed and wanted to do it, but Trinidad and Tobago had no context as to why. When I went to Bahia, I saw myself, I saw my cousins, I saw people like myself. They did everything like me. And I thought this would have been great. We play soccer, we do mass, we do all these things together. Why not? Why not twin it? But there was no traction. The Minister of Port of Spain now, the mayor, has said that he will want to do this and he has been open to trying. And I will try again if anybody wants to go with me. Bahia, Port of Spain, twin.
Keith, any thoughts? Keela?
Well, maybe I can jump in.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what year, but it wasn't so long ago. We had a conference on these very same issues. It seems like a perpetual thing. And we had and it was actually just before Carnival in Trinidad and Tobago. And we had people from Africa who had come to participate. And they asked the very same questions. They were from several countries, I think 5 different African countries. I would say to you, as they asked or inquired, what is it about Trinidad Carnival that gives it its global appeal? Why has it spread so quickly? How has it been able to achieve things? So the guy from Nigeria, for example, he says, we have over 100 million people and you have a population of just over 1 million. How were you able to export Trinidad and Tobago Carnival? I mean, the Nigerian diaspora is about 20 times bigger than the population of Trinidad and Tobago. Right? And you know what? We couldn't answer their questions. That's because we are not fully appreciative, and this is where Derrick's point is really valid here. We don't really understand our own festival and how it has been able to achieve such levels of global participation and even national participation. So for example, let me give you an example. So it was merchants in the late 19th century that introduced competition into the Trinidad Carnival. Given that they couldn't tame it, they decided to somehow maximize on it. And what they realized is that when they had a competition outside of their establishment, sales went up in their stores. And so the whole competition model evolved from the merchants recognizing that there was a significant economic benefit to Trinidad and Tobago Carnival. So rather than trying to stop it, let's somehow incorporate it. You've seen the similar kinds of trends taking place in the Mardi Gras in New Orleans and in the Brazilian carnivals in the late 19th century, early 20th century, the process by which they were commercialized. Okay, so I could talk ad nauseum about the commercialization history, but generally, the people who are involved in administering Carnival, managing Carnival, know very little about the history, know very little about the trends and patterns in the contemporary. And so, by and large, we are shooting blanks in the dark. And that's where the issue of policy evolving from strategy is absent. I've participated in so many committees, task force, you name it, and really try to push through the government of Trinidad and Tobago to develop a strategy in regards to Carnival and the creative industries. By and large, I would say, and is evident in most developing countries, there isn't an understanding of how we can convert our natural assets or cultural assets into viable industry. Other countries do this. Other cultures do this. So there's a cultural confidence deficit that we still need to grapple with. And that's really at the core of the matter. We don't need to solve that generally right now. There are things that we can do better right now and get great uplift. And that's what we need to focus on. So what are the transitions towards the transformation? So I end on that note. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yes, Keith, thank you. Since you're in the spotlight, there was a question, if pods are not the solution, then what is the solution going forward from CNC3 Carissa Lee? But before you respond, just to share with you a comment coming from Dwayne Plaza, one of the many trainees who have been involved in the export of Carnival abroad. And he's making a comment in relation to your point on gentrification of Carnival. And he states, this is a great point, Keith. I've watched the same declining trend in participation among the African Caribbean working class and below due to economics of the increasing costs. As well, people have been pushed aside by the all-inclusive bans. Is that so, Derrick? Which cater to a middle and upper class element. It gets boring after a while if you cannot jump into a ban because most bans now have security. The effect of this is changing the nature of Carnival from social to exclusive, unquote. Although I thought Carnival started with the exclusive. But that's a comment from Dwayne. And Keith, if pods are not the solution, what is?
We need a whole separate session on this particular issue. But okay, what pods represent is what the ropes and the reintroduction of ropes around bans. And I say reintroduction because they were introduced back in the 1920s and 30s, and then they disappeared, and then they were brought back in the 1980s and 90s. All right, so it's where you separate the middle classes from the working classes. So back in the 1920s and 30s, the middle classes started to parade on what we call flatbed trucks. So they weren't on the road, they were on the trailers. So Keela was making the point that Carnival has always been about both inclusion and exclusion. And it's a dynamic contest between the two. And that's what gives it its vitality. That's what gives it its movement, all right? Because it's never static, it's always evolving. So when there's slippage in one area, there's new traction in another area. So I'm very confident that Trinidad and Tobago Carnival will sustain. The question though is this, and I think the dearly departed Pat Bishop made the point very eloquently. She said that Carnival artistic production was moving west of Cipriani Boulevard. And I remember when she said it, I was like, wow, she put her finger on the nail, right? Because what is happening is that in terms of production of Carnival costumes or even steel bands and music even, the capabilities are moving away from the ordinary citizen, because you now need a higher level of technologies, a higher level of networking capacity, etc. So can our working class bands set up a website with e-commerce capabilities? And if they can't, is there a mechanism to support them to do so? Can they position themselves to ensure that their music is on Spotify? If they can't, is there a supporting mechanism to ensure that they can do so? All right, and these becomes the critical question of where we convert the issue into this ecosystem approach, where we try to identify who are all the key stakeholders, who are all the beneficiaries, and how can we ensure that we approach this in as much of an inclusive approach as possible? Because ultimately, that's what Carnival has done for Trinidad and Tobago society. It has made it a society where all can participate to a greater degree. It's our saving grace. It's not just the golden egg that I mentioned earlier. It's also the mechanism by which you allow for catharsis, social inclusion, social protests, etc., etc. And that is the bedrock of the Carnival experience. How do we continue to nourish it rather than allow it to languish? And for me, that's where our roles as academics, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and ordinary citizens need to be enhanced so that we ensure that this beautiful thing called Trinidad and Tobago Carnival grows by leaps and bounds. But we need a separate session to talk about pods, because to me, pods are going to replicate and deepen the process of exclusion rather than inclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. Now, folks, we have entered last lap. Okay, we have a last lap here of questions, as the time is upon us. But I want to ask two more questions coming from the chat. But I want to give a shout out to Stuart Rogers, who is listening from Belgium. Stuart, thanks for connecting with us and following the discussion. This question comes from Shabaka Thompson. Considering that COVID has forced us to reset the approach to hosting the event, is there an alternative infrastructure apart from the seasonal one that can capture and develop a carnival ecosystem where the industry could thrive? Is there an alternative infrastructure apart from the seasonal one that can capture and develop a carnival ecosystem where the industry could thrive? Another question from Stuart Rogers on the internationalization of Carnival. Is TNT on the UNESCO ICH list? I think that has to do with cultural heritage. If not, why not? If so, can't we use that status, as other lesser carnivals have been doing, to make a name internationally? Any takers? And you could give your last comments as well. There are 52 new messages in the chat, and we don't have time to have that. Keith, I can need another discussion.
Yeah, I quickly comment on the International Cultural Heritage Award system for UNESCO. I was the chair of that committee. I was not even living in Trinidad at the time. and we prepared the report in 3 months, submitted it on time. I remember it well because it was my birthday. And when UNESCO required us to do some updates to the proposal, the members from the Trinidad and Tobago government that was involved in this didn't see it fit. I hope that doesn't get me in trouble. Even the chief judge came to Trinidad and met with me to talk about it. This is a famous academic. He's written one of the most important books about music in small countries around the world. And you know what he said to me? Much of what we had presented in our submission was called a candidature file. He and J.D. Elder had developed many of those same proposals back in the 1950s and 60s. Oh. So he was heartened to see that we had picked up the ball and were taking it further. But he says there is an implementation gap that still resides. So 50, 60, 70 years later, we have not moved on investing and deepening the heritage component in our Trinidad and Tobago Carnival and not doing the things that we have identified now for 60, 70 years. This is not just a problem in Carnival, it's replicated in every other sector of our economy and society. We don't know how to implement, and that's part of our culture. So we need to accept that that is the case and start to address that. So I think the candidature file can be reinvigorated, resubmitted. I have all the data and information on my computer. I welcome anybody from the Trinidad and Tobago government who wants to make this happen. The Jamaicans have done it with their reggae. Why can't we do it? And they submitted their application 15 years after we did. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. Comment from Wendell Constantine. The pandemic has presented an opportunity to rethink and reimagine the way the National Festival is proposed, planned, and presented, which was raised by one of the panelists here today. Any closing comments, remarks?
My apologies. Dr. McCree, do you mind repeating the question that you asked about the seasonal nature? There was a question that I don't know if you've answered yet. The seasonal nature of the festival that you asked just now. Are you able to?
Is there an alternative infrastructure apart from the seasonal one that can capture and develop a carnival ecosystem where the industry could thrive?
Right. Thanks. So I want to say a couple of things about this, and just really quickly. I think when people talk about the seasonal nature of Carnival, for many practitioners, particularly on the commercial side, that seasonal nature is actually around. Because of just how many carnivals there are throughout the world, you can kind of wave and be in carnival mode for a large part of the year. Because just of how many of these things that there are, right? So for many people for many practitioners, the seasonal nature is actually a good thing, but that is only as it relates to commercial practitioners and the internationalization in terms of trade in some ways. However, there are two things I wanted to mention here. One, it does exclude the working class to a large extent. To a large extent, not entirely, but it does. Part of the problem, as I see you talking about this alternative infrastructure, is that there seems to be a kind of proclivity towards real state-centered decision-making. Like the state has to be like the person in the center driving it. So if NCC don't do something, if we don't have pods, the thing will die. You understand? Whereas they have people doing things all over listen, they have real thing going on, whether or not, that's why when people talk about Carnival dying, Carnival is not gonna die. I mean, you can't kill Carnival. Carnival is people. Carnival is culture. You know what I mean? And again, it's the kind of snobbery thinking that Carnival somehow is the state's doing. You understand? We have this very state-centric, very kind of institutionalized thinking about the importance of what the state does on an annual basis to the viability of Carnival, when in some ways, and not controversial, in some ways, the development happens in spite of the state, not because of the state. And so I just wanted to make sure, when I talk about the alternative infrastructures, what I would say is, I think that the alternative infrastructures need to be a bit more democratic. It needs to actually be driven both by private sector and by the state. And that's important because the ecosystem that we talked about earlier, there are parts of the ecosystem that don't make any money, but they incredibly.
When last lap, you can take a last minute wine.
Yes, I take my
60 seconds.
60 seconds.
All right. Just one more comment question here coming from the chat. There was a lot of talk about the global impact of TNT's Carnival. Patrice Roberts' song is being used by many celebrities. Denise Belfont's song was sampled by an American rapper, and that should be a Jamaican artist. And Kes represent Trinidad and Tobago with percolating performance of Jolene at Grammy's Global Spin. Are these steps in the right direction for this country's culture? You can respond to this as we fade out. 60 seconds, last lap. The police are waiting.
All of the above. Yeah, well, I think that those efforts are well positioned, and I think we just need to keep doing them, but we need to keep doing them in a concerted effort. So when Kes goes out, he needs to go out with a contingent of people around him who represent the country in different areas in the entertainment industry, so that we can truly move the entire thing forward. I eat Japanese food, but it's Japanese culture that I eat, you know, and I learn about it. So when one goes, culture is the first, sport is second, and we need to use them as vehicles for all that we want to be in the world.
Thank you. Thank you, Derrick. Any closing comments? 30 seconds. Okay.
So is this from anyone, or are you going to call
anyone? Any closing comments? You know, quick,
okay.
Quick wine, Kieran.
I just want to say, yeah, so I just want to make sure that we've been very, very clear about this. This is not to condemn the states, it's not to condemn people, it's just to challenge all of us to think differently about what we're doing, to think differently about your own culture, because the culture belongs to us, and to think very, very differently about where we're trying to go and what we are trying to do. And if it's going to evolve into something positive, let it be intentional. And I was asked to speak about leveraging our brand. If as a country we're going to do that, we need to determine what it is we're leveraging, and based on who we are, which is something that Derrick spoke about earlier. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Anyone else? Floor is open.
Just want to say that in the context of the ongoing pandemic, that, you know, we look at, I'm seeing some things on the chat, some comments about governments involvement and our dependence on government. But at the end of the day, each one of us is responsible for ourselves. So what I ask, you know, everyone listening, you know, to take personal responsibility during this period, so that we can decrease the transmission of SARS-CoV-2, and thereby improve the public health situation in the country. So to everyone, for whatever it's worth, have a safe and a good carnival.
Thank you.
Taste.
Any other closing? Okay. All right, I would call it there. I want to thank you, all the panelists, for sparing the time, making the effort to be part of this conversation. We had over 100 participants at one point in time. If this is some indication that Carnival, there's still a lot of interest in Carnival, and its present state, its future state, and the transformations associated with that. And thank you for being part of this discussion, and you all who have been practitioners at various levels. Thank you for your contribution to ensuring that the Carnival keeps going and is sustainable. So I would now like to invite you to, or not invite you to, but invite my colleague, Dr. Rampersad, doing the vote of thanks.
Wow.
Or Dr. St. Bernard to offer closing comments.
So,
Dr. Abdusad, you there? Oh, yes,
yes.
yes.
Yes,
So over to Dr.
totally.
Abdusad, our colleague, to offer her, vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roy. Become, a master of ceremonies. You mastered the art and the science, and I want to commend you. But I have to say, this is a rather stimulating discussion. I was pretty booked today, but when I started to listen, I thought I would just come on to give the vote of thanks. When I started to listen, it was so stimulating. The discussion was so stimulating. Someone, myself, very much interested in the whole carnival discourse. I was gripped, and some of the issues arising, and I know I don't have the prerogative to really speak, but the pods being, an exclusionary, exclusionary measure, whether deliberate or not. We see the cost of the pods, and while it may not be exorbitant, what is the impact of those who usually go in the streets to enjoy the carnival? And I think that is the kind of exclusion that Dr. Niles was speaking to. And then there is the aspect of the ecosystem. We also have to pay attention to the role of the media in this ecosystem. There is an air dynamic, rather than the ground dynamic. We have the ground dynamic, but we also have an air dynamic now actually amplified with social media. But I can't recall a marsh crash show that I haven't looked at on television for decades. We look at marsh crash, some of us are even Panorama on television, King and Queen of the Bands on television. For those who don't want to go to actually go on the ground, or for one reason or the other cannot go. So that air dynamic and the role of the media is critical, whether it's mainstream media now social media, something we also would want to develop. Dr. Niles, you and I've gone back a long way. I don't know if you recall, and I have it in my background here, this Sailor Mars and All Stars, tripping to All Stars. Some decades ago, you and our dearly departed friend, Professor Girvan, our mutual friend from Jamaica, Dr. Diana Thorburn. It's a small world. Dr. Kieran Niles was my high school student, so it's really a really very, very small world. Someone asked, why was Trinidad, such a small nation, 1.3 million, able, Dr. Niles, you asked this question, and I find it highly provocative. Why were we able to export our carnival? And Nigeria wasn't, 20 million, 20 times, almost 20 times as much people. And I think it has to do with the fact of, one, being Trinity to the bone, but also carnival being part of our bones. And therefore, I think Dr. Niles said it, wherever a Trini go, carnival goes. So it's our own sense of nationalism, a very pervasive sense of nationalism, very strong sense of nationalism on the one hand, and carnival being part of that sense of nationalism. So if I were to proffer a response to that question, this would be it. So let me just go on now to do what I was supposed to do, and which is to give a very brief vote of thanks to first all of our very, very impressive panelists, very diverse viewpoints, very, very interesting. Dr. Joanne Tull, Dr. Keller Francis, Dr. Keith Nurse, Dr. Kieran Niles, Dr. Franca Devines, Mr. Derrick Lewis. I want to really, really sincerely thank you all. Like I said, the panels, the contributions were very impressive, to the point that one really couldn't leave. We saw that we went more than half an hour. Now it's almost approaching 1 p.m. when we were supposed to finish at 12. And that's because the audience themselves were so engaged. So I want to really thank the panelists, both for their contributions, their presentations, and their responses and engagement with the questions and queries and comments from the audience. I also want to thank the staff of marketing, Ms. Joanne Green. They've always been so good, testing before, numerous tests, making sure that everybody will be able to handle this online forum so that we would go on without these, these Murphys, the electronic glitches that tend to come in and interrupt these sessions. We had no such glitches. So let me commend marketing for that. And the SIT staff as well, particularly Mr. Kerry Bullock, they've also would have been working with marketing to ensure that this online forum going well. The SALISES staff, we have several of them, and always on board and always ready and willing to help and always doing a phenomenal job. Mr. Sheldon Warner, Ms. Francis Aline, Mr. Ephraim Thomas, Ms. Kathleen Modest, been on the ground with us, you know, checking on each of us, making sure that our computers are all set, that we have it right. And our chair, like I said, now the Master of Ceremonies, Dr. Roy McCree, Master of the Art, and Dr. McCree, you add so much richness through your moderation to these panels that you have been moderating over time. So I want to commend you for a job well done. And last but by no means least, I want to thank our acting director, Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, for his insights and for his vision in having this panel. It is very timely, not just because of COVID, and COVID has brought on a whole new dynamic. You know, if I were to name this panel, I would have called it, this presentation, I would have called it Nostalgia. I think we had some bands named after nostalgia in the past, but it does bring a whole set of, you know, emotions, because we have not been able to enjoy Carnival as we have had it in the past. You know, whether it was through the media or whether it was on the ground, we have not been able to enjoy Carnival. And many of us are nostalgic about it. And that's why the pods brought up this whole barrage of emotions. I mean, some would have agreed, some disagreed. But the point is, this is something that is close to the heart of many citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. So Dr. St. Bernard, I want to thank you sincerely for your vision, you know, for the foresight in getting this panel together. At one point, we had around 100 participants, and I think that is highly commendable. So with that in mind, our colleagues, I think we would just want to pass on to our acting director, and this is the moderator's job actually, to give his closing comments. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you very much, Chairperson Dr. Roy McCree, and thank you very much, Indira, for your vote of thanks. I think my task is relatively simple. We have run out of time, and I want to bring this very enjoyable session that we have had to a close as soon as possible. Of course, I want to, as usual, thank all who have been responsible for this awesome event that we just witnessed today. And in particular, I want to express a very special thanks to the panelists who at short notice responded favorably to our call to duty in responding and in participating in this forum that we have had. In particular, I want to thank again Dr. Joanne Tull, Dr. Keith Nurse, Mr. Derrick Lewis, Dr. Franca Devines, Dr. Keller Francis, and Dr. Kieran Niles. This was a presentation of outstanding scholarship and practical experience in the field of Carnival studies that went way beyond our expectations. We are still here talking. And at this point, all I need to say is that we are going to be looking carefully at what was presented. And I am sure that not all of the questions were properly answered, given the range of questions and the volume of questions that came at us. But we are going to address those the best we can, and we will surely reach out to all who have participated to provide the answers to those questions that might not have been answered because we have run out of time. SALISES intends to be in touch with the panelists again to see how we can, fine-tune what was presented here today. Very important material. And again, on behalf of SALISES, on behalf of the university, I want to thank everyone for having participated in today's event. It's the 5th of a series of forums we started back in October, and all have really come true in superlative terms and have more or less indicated that, SALISES, through its efforts, is reaching out to the general public in terms of informing them of the issues and the critical debates and providing opportunities for creating insights that could find their way into various policy realms to impact positively progressive development agendas. So with that, thanks to all, and do have a wonderful rest of day and a wonderful weekend, and we shall keep everyone apprised of future forums as we plan them. Thank you very much all. Greatly appreciated your presence.
Thank you, folks. Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much.